Just waiting on Instagram because it's always the last thing to actually work. And there we go. It is good to go. Awesome. Yeah, folks, if you're joining, say hi in the chat. Let me know it's working. It's always helpful. And we'll get started here. So if you're new to the live streams that I do at this time, which used to be at 9 p.m. PST, I'm trying to do them at 7 p.m. PST. These are based on newsletter articles that I put out, and then I like to chat through them and get people's perspective and kind of elaborate on them a little bit further. So we will be going over my last newsletter article. I'll put that into the chat. This one is called Radical Accountability versus Blame Culture. And so I'll put that into here if you have not read it yet, just so you can check it out. If you are interested in general about the topics that come up in the live streams, these live streams are almost always based on my newsletter articles, so you're welcome to check those out. If not, you can just tune in when I do them live, and that's cool too. But if you are sort of catching this at an off time, don't worry, because they're all recorded. They're available on YouTube. You can watch these on any platform you want, but yeah, they're available on YouTube if you want to check them out after. So again, just for folks, as you're joining, let me know if you're in the chat. Let me know it's working. I do appreciate that. And I'm just going to refresh chat as well on my side. Hey there on Instagram. I am at Microsoft. Yes, I am a principal engineering manager on the Office 365 side of Microsoft. So the team that I work on is one of the teams that's kind of responsible for doing routing. Sorry, there's a huge dog hair on my microphone. So we are responsible for essentially making sure requests go between services, and that anyone making requests from the outside of Microsoft into the Office 365 services is routed to the proper service that's running. So that's the team that I am currently on at Microsoft. Prior to that, I worked on the deployment team, and so I managed part of the deployment team because there's a bunch of stuff there, and we were responsible for deploying the hundreds of services that make up Office 365 to the machines around the planet. So that's a bit about me. But yes, I'm at Microsoft. This conversation is going to be about radical accountability and blame culture. And I wanted to start off by kind of saying thanks to someone that reached out to me on social media, and they were talking to me about this basically this feeling of blame that was happening at their workplace, and they were curious if this was like a normal thing or my perspective on it. And I guess the reality is, like, I want to say, unfortunately, it's probably more normal than it should be, this idea of having like a blame culture. And I think and I hope that a lot of places are moving away from this, because it's pretty terrible overall. Blame doesn't really get you very far, and I think some people use it in terms of fear. Like, basically, if we can make sure that people are kept in order through fear, then then they'll do the right things. But it almost always backfires. It creates a pretty terrible working environment. So they had reached out to me and they were asking about this, and I said, hey, you know what, like, this is probably something I can write about, and then I can stream about it as well. So I have no idea if the individual will be able to make it for the live. That's totally cool. If they can't, they know it's recorded as well. So this is one of those things where I'm like, I know it will help at least one person, so I'm very happy to do it. And I'm hopeful that if other people are going through this kind of thing where they're experiencing a culture of blame at work, that they have some ideas for how to navigate that. And for other folks, maybe you are someone who has a bit of say and a bit of authority in how things are kind of going at the workplace. And I just want this to be a reminder for those individuals too, that there are significantly better ways to approach things other than blame culture. So I figured this time, usually I don't do this, but when I wrote my article, I actually wrote like a bit of wrote a story, and it's just to provide some framing if you're not used to this kind of thing. I wanted to provide some framing so that we could go through that. Then when we go to talk about what blame culture is and what I've kind of coined as radical accountability, I have no idea if I made that up. I know there's radical candor. I kind of stole the radical part from radical candor, but I haven't heard anyone else say radical accountability. So I figured I'd put that together, and if it sticks for people and they like it, that's great. If not, at least you'll know what I'm talking about. So with that said, before I switch over and start kind of sharing my screen and reading the first part of the story here, I just wanted to remind folks that please use the chat if you have questions about literally anything. No math questions, please. I'm pretty bad at math, but I'm happy to answer questions in chat. I always let people know on the streams, like, my goal is to engage and converse with you. So if there's stuff I can answer, I would rather be doing that than just kind of, I don't know, like talking at you. I always say if I wanted to do that, I could just make my YouTube videos instead, but this is an opportunity where we can kind of chat back and forth. So with that said, let me flip this over to full screen mode. For folks on Instagram, I apologize because it might not fit. It'll probably clip off the edges, so I'm really sorry, but this is kind of what I got to work with. So I'm going to read it out, and we'll see how it goes. So this article was Radical Accountability versus Blame Culture, and the story is kind of under this section called It's Your Fault. So you've been working on a feature now for 3 weeks, and you've finally gotten the necessary sign-off on your PR to get things pushed to production. I think probably a bunch of us have felt this way. You're working on something for a while, and you finally have sign-off. Instagram handle is, I'll put it in the chat, dev.leader. That is Instagram. So this feature has been challenging because you had to make sure you could work with the product owner to understand the requirements more clearly. They seemed quite ambiguous to start with. Again, pretty typical thing, right? So you're starting a project, you're kind of not really sure what to do. I got to block this person in the chat for doing whatever they're doing. And so, you know, you're starting to work on something and immediately you're like, hey, I'm not really familiar with this, but like, that's cool. Like, you know, it's going to happen. So you're taking the necessary steps to go talk with the product owner. And I've kind of alluded to the fact that at the current state, you know, we're fast forwarding a little bit, but it's taken a few weeks to kind of get to the point of sign off. So things became more challenging when the two senior engineers on the team had originally had some conflicting advice for you during some of the early design phase. So you've done your best to get a quick design doc together to outline how you plan to integrate the feature into the existing code, and you even had the product owner check out the doc before you got technical feedback. So the picture that I'm trying to paint here is that, you know, you as the person in this story, you are taking what I would probably call like some good steps to make sure that you could get some feature integrated, right? Clarifying requirements, you're putting a brief design doc together, whatever that happens to look like where you're working at. You're getting the product owner to go, yep, that makes sense to me, like I agree with that. And then you're actually going to go work with more senior engineers to make sure that they understand what's going on in the design doc. So after settling on the right approach with the more senior engineers, you worked on coding up your solution. And so you're going through this process, whatever that looks like, whatever you're building, but you're putting it together. And then you showed a working version of the feature in the product to the product owner, and they agreed it looked good to go. So again, throughout this process, you are working with your product owner. Depending where you're working, this might be maybe you have QA or you have testers. I'm just using product owner as a generalization here as someone that can sort of help direct you on what the expectation is, and then also give you some of that feedback that from their perspective, this is solving what the requirement is. Okay, so they're agreeing it's good to go, and you also had the engineers sign off on things. But you know the pull request is going to be a bit of a pain in the butt because you need to get the senior engineers to sign off, right? So after a few days of making adjustments based on their feedback, it's time to merge the pull request into deploy. A great way to finish a Monday. So far in this story, we've gone through the process. Again, I think all good steps in trying to make sure you have alignment, getting other people involved, especially if you have more senior engineers to work with and they can give you some guidance. You can make adjustments based on their feedback. All, I think, great steps. So that's wrapping up on a Monday. And then I leave a couple of days in between. I say Wednesday morning, you log in to continue working through the requirements of the next feature. But your messenger dings as soon as you're online. And of course, it's your manager. This is exactly what you want to have first thing in the morning. Someone like me coming to bother you, right? And the message says, hey, we need you to get on this incident bridge right now. Workflows for users are completely broken, and we've traced it back to your change. That's an exciting message, right? Everyone loves receiving something like that when they're getting online in the morning. So I said, not a great way to start a Wednesday. Damn it. So you get onto this bridge, and for people not familiar with the terminology, just like a group call. Might have different connotation depending on where you're working at, but it's just people on a collaborative call trying to diagnose and mitigate what's going on. So on the bridge, one of the senior engineers from your team explains that they've already rolled back your change to mitigate the customer issues. So basically, you're kind of tuning into this a little bit late, not necessarily your fault, but like, hey, you're on there now and you've been told, look, was your problem? We already got it rolled back, okay? Then they ask you, and this is on a group call with other people, so not just the senior engineers, it's going to have your manager, you, other stakeholders that were involved, and they say, why didn't you flight this change out? Didn't you think about the fact that you could break our product for all these users? Okay, so you have this senior engineer, one of the people that worked on your code review, and they looked at your design doc, and they're basically calling out in front of the whole group, like, you didn't flight this thing. And for folks that are not familiar with the terminology of flighting, because I realize depending on the audience I have, flighting is just the ability to have a controlled way to turn on feature sets for a different scope of users. So you could flight things out and have it off by default, and this could go everywhere and no one will see it. And then you could turn on the flight and you could say literally for like one user over here. Or you might have heard of like A/B testing where you could turn it on for like 50% of a particular population of users, that kind of thing. There's ring-based flighting where you roll out to larger and larger scopes, all sorts of things. But the idea with flighting is that it's a controlled way that you can turn on your feature, and that way if something goes wrong, you can turn the flight off. I mean, sometimes not quite that easy, but that's the idea behind what flighting is. So then your manager adds in, not only was this blocking their workflows, this is obviously a contrived example, by the way. What are the workflows? We don't really know, but we've had several customers contacting support that this feature doesn't make any sense. This needs a complete redesign because it's confusing and conflicts with how they're trying to use the product. We'll go over this in the post-incident review. Okay, so you've been on this call, probably not for too long, and you've not only had a senior engineer basically call you out and saying like, hey man, why didn't you go flight this thing? Like, that's a huge miss on your part. And then you have your manager telling you, again, in front of this group of people, like, this feature doesn't even make sense. Kind of like, how could you even deliver this? It's not even a good feature. So the senior engineer was right that it should have been flighted. How did that get missed, right? Like, they make a good point, right? I mean, it sucks how they delivered it, and it would be really crappy to hear that in front of a group of people, probably pretty embarrassing, kind of singling you out, but they are right. If you didn't flight out the change, it's probably something that should have happened so you could have them control it more easily. So how did that get missed? And the customers find this confusing? Like, that really sucks, right? But the product owner worked on this too. So kind of interesting, the product owner, at multiple points along the way, they clarified the expectations, they looked at the design doc, and they saw it working in the product before you even had it committed. Okay, so, but a post-incident review should help everyone understand where the problems occurred so everyone can get better for next time. Wrong. Okay, so we're about to go into the post-incident review. For folks that aren't familiar with this concept, a post-incident review, frequently called a post-mortem. A post-incident review is an opportunity. Generally, this is done in a blameless way because otherwise we'll see exactly what that looks like, but you do this in a way where you can have conversations to figure out the root cause. And the whole goal of a post-mortem or post-incident review is to understand the root cause of whatever happened for any scenario where there was an issue. And generally going through the root cause, there's a practice called 5 whys, where you can keep asking why and digging into something and then trying to understand what the root cause is. Now, you might not always get to the root cause, but going through the exercise will at least give you a bunch of different ideas for things that you can improve upon. And then given those ideas, that means you could have something like work items or repair items to go make improvements for next time. So by going through this, what should be happening is that the entire group gets to learn from a mistake, an error, whatever happened, and they say, great, we can try to make this better for next time by doing these things. So there is a review, there's an analysis, and then there's some work that gets scheduled to make things better. That's the idea. So Friday's post-incident review starts off with your manager giving a speech about how the team will start a zero-tolerance policy around non-flighted features. Your change was the catalyst. So you can imagine how that speech might feel when you're basically being singled out as the one person that messed everything up for everyone else, right? And now the spotlight is on you. So tell us, how did you manage to ruin the experience for so many of our users with just this single change? That great Monday that you had seems like it was an eternity ago. You feel like closing your laptop lid and curling up under your desk. So, would be curious, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, totally get it, but would be curious how many people have kind of lived through an experience like this, right? Where you're basically being blamed, you're being put on the spot, right? All these things that don't feel so great, but they're happening to you. And then it's in response to something that you had a role in this. And in this particular example, one might argue maybe you had the biggest role in this, right? Perhaps. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and we'll talk more about blame culture and what's going on here. So I'm going to switch back to the article in a moment, but not quite yet. So I'm just going to talk through, some of the things that someone like this might be experiencing as they went through this process, right? So I wanted to call out that, yeah, I realize this example might seem exaggerated, for sure, especially if you've never been in something like this. I've been pretty fortunate in my career in terms of blame culture. It's been quite minimized. I've almost always worked in environments that were very much supportive, but I have heard some pretty crappy stories about people that had gone through things. So it might seem exaggerated, but maybe some people have been through even worse with respect to blame culture. So I wanted to call out a bunch of different feelings and things that you might be experiencing as you're going through this. And part of this is to understand, again, like you might be someone that has gone through this. And if you're someone in a position that is having influence over this kind of stuff, like something to think about in terms of how effective the blame culture is. Okay. So said probably some feeling of embarrassment, right? So when you're getting singled out in groups of people and people are kind of questioning you, like, why did you do this? Or calling out mistakes you made, like, you're probably going to feel pretty embarrassed. It's not a really good feeling. You're also going to feel like you're not supported because the people that you were working with on this stuff are now also kind of like stepping back and being like this example was the senior engineer saying like, hey, why didn't you flight this? You had the product owner being like, hey, what's up? Like, they're not really getting involved. And you have your manager saying like, how could you deliver this thing? Like no one likes it. So you're not going to feel very supported. You're going to have this feeling of isolation, right? Again, it's a combination of being embarrassed and unsupported is probably a little bit of isolation. For a lot of people going through something like this, you might have, your imposter syndrome flare up. And I like talking about imposter syndrome a lot because I think it's important. By the way, hi to Ali on YouTube. Good to see you. Thanks for joining. Imposter syndrome is not, it's not when you literally don't have the skills. When you don't have any of the skills or experiences, you may actually be an imposter. However, imposter syndrome is when you do actually legitimately have the skills and experiences. And in this particular case, we hadn't, it didn't clarify it for the story. This individual might actually have the skills and experiences. And now they're questioning like everything, right? They're like, oh, am I even worthy of my job position? Like maybe I'm stupid. Like you have all these things that start to go through your head when you're experiencing imposter syndrome. And then a couple of other emotions I listed out were like frustration, anger, sadness. Depending on who you are and how you react to these types of things, I think it would be totally understandable if at the end of that kind of conversation, you were like just feeling a whole bunch of different crappy feelings. So I just wrote in my article, like, I think that there's a lot of missed opportunities when a culture is centered around blame. And the reason that I call that out is that, like, I think that when you're doing this blame culture thing, it's almost like one person might learn from it in a really crappy way. Like it's not very motivating, but they might go, hey, I never want that to happen again. So like, I'm going to learn my lesson. And I'm going to talk about this briefly in a second, but what's not happening is that other people, and maybe you're making other people fearful and they want to avoid that too. So they might learn their lesson. But again, the motivation's kind of the wrong thing. It's like it's making people fearful. And when people become fearful, what happens is like this avoidance thing. So instead of being empowered to make positive changes, they're now avoiding almost doing anything that's going to put them at risk of being in this position. So sometimes you might think, well, hey, it's going to make people, they're going to be more careful, roll changes out more slowly. Like we want them, to be very cautious. And like, yeah, you do. And that makes sense. But like, do you want people to be afraid? Because there's a difference between being cautious and being afraid. Because when you're afraid, you don't even want to get the work done because now you're nervous that anything you do is going to mess up. Instead, if you're empowered, you can be cautious and empowered and try to drive positive change. Oh, cool. Hey, thanks, Ali. I do appreciate that. Yeah, it's I currently don't have any positions for mentorship, so I'm so sorry. I'm just super busy with a lot of other things going on, but I do appreciate you being here. So thanks very much. But yeah, the mentorship stuff is really challenging right now. Hey to Zod on Kick. Good to see you. Okay, so I want to go into now who's actually at fault in this example. And I did write this story on purpose. Like I spent time trying to figure out how I could frame a bunch of stuff up so that this part of the article would feel almost like comically exaggerated, okay? Because clearly in the example I gave, and again, if you're tuning in just now, I gave an example, like a contrived story about basically someone delivering a change that was busted and there were some missed opportunities along the way, and then everyone blamed them for it. But you might think, okay, yes, this one person is the responsible party member for this issue. And you're not wrong that they are a responsible party member, but there's a lot of other people that I purposefully included in that story to paint this picture. So let's jump back over to the full screen mode here. Again, sorry, Instagram folks. I do apologize that it's probably going to be trimmed for you, but let me go through it. So I said, who was actually at fault? And I said, the confusing answer is nobody and everybody is at fault. And I just said it's a kind of a trick question or a weird way to ask it because I think the word fault has a lot of connotation or meaning that can be attached to it, right? So instead of talking about fault, because fault starts to assume some level of blame, I want to avoid blame altogether, okay? So we're going to avoid blame altogether. We're going to be talking about responsibility and accountability. So if we use these two words instead of who is at fault and say who has responsibility and who has accountability, I think we can get some very interesting answers here. Okay, so I said the project was carried out by the individual developers. So, okay, they play a role. And this is the obvious one, right? The person who did the design doc, they got the clarification, they wrote the code, they pushed the changes, like they played a role in this, obviously, okay? So the project requirements were clarified by the product owner, right? So I said that right at the beginning. The person who was doing the work had to get clarification. So now the product owner has also played a role. There was a design document by the individual developer and they chose who to share it with. So they again played a role. So if they didn't do a design doc and they didn't include anyone else, that could have been a missed opportunity, but they did play a role and they chose to include other people on that. So that's like a positive role they played, I would say. And then I said the product owner reviewed the design document. So again, they played a role. There were 2 senior engineers who reviewed the document and had feedback they needed to align on. So now we've added 2 more engineers that have played a role in this story, right? So we're up to 4 people now. The individual developer coded up the solution. So again, that's, an initial role they played. The individual developer demonstrated the working feature to the product owner. Again, this is a positive role they're playing. So now the product owner and the developer both played an additional role. The individual developer put up the code for review. So some places reviews are not enforced. I realize that many places there's pull requests and like an official sign-off process. So you might say that one's cheating, but like it is technically a responsibility they had to do. So they played a role. The two senior engineers reviewed the code with feedback. They both played another role here. So we're still up to 4 people. Okay, but they're playing more and more of a role in this change going out. The individual developer corrected the changes. They played another role. The senior engineers approved the pull request. They also played an additional role. We're going to keep going because it keeps going. The individual developers submitted the pull request to be built and deployed. They played an additional role. So again, we are up to 4 people now that have played roles in this part. And we're going to go on to the next part. So I'm going to read some questions in the chat. And I do see that it says it's probably off topic. So let me see if I'll read through it, and then we can probably pause, and then we'll do the question here, and then I'll go back to the article. So let me switch gears because I do like making sure I can answer stuff as we go. It's probably a good stopping point for me to stop rambling about the article. But so my friend basically got into Google, and I see the method step approach is basically have experience, make a good resume, and then data structures and algorithms. But the topics you go over, specifically real legitimate engineering principles and software engineering design, is not shown anywhere in big tech. So my question is now, as a new grad, what do I focus on? Everything that I talk about is stuff that you're going to be using in real life, and I'm going to share a couple links in the chat after it. I'm laughing at that because I think there's a very big difference in how you approach, number one, getting recognized for getting interviews. So like resume writing and like applications and stuff like that. So it's sort of a phase. The second part is like, now that you have the interviews, how are you interviewing? That's another phase. And then the third phase, which is generally the longest phase, is what you're actually doing in your career, which is a lot of the stuff that I talk about, which is like, it's the real world stuff after you've gotten the job. So I really want to get into big tech, but also prefer legitimate software engineering rather than DSA, data structures and algorithms. So is my job at big tech going to be surrounding more engineering when I get in, and then I'll enjoy it more than DSA grind, or big tech not focus on these software design practices? Okay. So no, the reality is like a lot of software engineering is not hyper focused on data structures and algorithms. Now, someone is probably listening to that and saying, oh, no, that's bullcrap. I mean, like, code is algorithmic, okay? So you're going to be writing algorithms if you need logic to flow through things. But I mean, like, you're not going to be doing, like, island problems and reversing linked lists, and you're not doing this kind of stuff. It just, if you had to be doing this kind of stuff in your job, no one would get anything done. Like, this stuff is already implemented. We're not doing it. I'm going to talk about an exception in just a moment, but the reality is, like, a lot of software engineering is like stitching things together, understanding requirements, and you're building things versus like working through kind of trick scenarios. There are exceptions to this, okay? And to give you an example, it's a weird thing to explain. I think when we think about sometimes like data structures and algorithms, data structures in particular are like a pretty low-level concept, right? So, for example, you literally, and I mean this seriously, and I can speak confidently when I say this because I know people that are like this, you can absolutely use a dictionary or a hash set and have absolutely no idea how it works internally. Zero. You can absolutely use it, okay? So, and I know people that are coding up solutions. They literally have software contracts where they're building products. And I can guarantee you, if I called him right now and I said, tell me how a dictionary works, he would say, I have no idea what you even mean by that. But he knows how to use it, okay? So when we go through these data structure questions, and a lot of the time it's this explanation about how they work, like, is that helpful? Sure. Extra information is helpful. Understanding how things work is helpful. I'm not saying it's not, but it's not a requirement to get your job done. just as an example, right? Like, so when you're going through interviews, especially in big tech, a lot of this kind of stuff comes up where it's like understanding the details about things. And I would say a lot of the time, like, and I can't speak for everyone in their job position because it only takes one person to say, like, no, like, not for me. And like, I can't use the words always or never because it just doesn't work that way. There's always exceptions. I would say a lot of people that are building software do not have to know the very specific details off the top of their head about different data structures and algorithms. Basics, yes, right? Like arrays are generally fixed size collections. If you need something that's not, then you would use something like a list structure. You know, you want to understand the characteristics about dictionaries and things like that, but the nitty gritty details about how all of them work, not extremely beneficial in day to day. The exception I wanted to talk about is when we think about things like big tech, and it doesn't have to be big tech, just consider things at large scales. I was saying that data structures often feel like they're a low level concept, right? So if you were working on an embedded device, like you might find yourself making your own list structure or something like that, perhaps. And that's going to feel like it's low level. You have to understand the details, but the context there makes sense. Now, when we talk about things at incredible scale, and I mean like hundreds of thousands, millions, billions, or trillions, all of a sudden, if you had an example of a data structure taking an extra 10 bytes, okay, 10 bytes of memory, and all of a sudden, like per entry or something, and now you have to hold, a billion of them, how much extra memory is that? Like suddenly at that scale, you end up having this like huge amplification of the systems you're working on. So now you might say, hey, look, yeah, there is, of course, this language has a built-in dictionary data structure. It works for 99.99% of everything we have to do. But now we have this really bizarre case where we need like a more memory optimized dictionary. So we need to custom build a dictionary that will do that for us. And that's where you're going to have stuff that, yeah, like understanding data structures and algorithms more will help. But I think my experience has been the amount of emphasis on data structures and algorithms in interviews is pretty crappy. And I think what makes it significantly worse is that a lot of the questions are like leet code style, which means that a lot of the time they're set up like a trick question. And then, like, what the hell are you testing someone on? That they're good at finding tricks or they're good at programming? Like, I don't know. So I don't really like a lot of big tech style interviews that focus especially on leet code. I think that it's garbage. I think there's better ways to test. But Ali, to your point, if you are interested in trying to interview for big tech, you're going to have to know data structures and algorithms pretty well. It's just what you probably need to expect in terms of interviewing. But in terms of what's happening on the job, I would say, like, generally no, and it's not something that you can't like figure out with some guidance, I would say. But that's been my experience. For context, I've been at Microsoft for 4 years. I've been in industry for 14 years. So I've seen some things, but you know, your experience might be different, and I'm not trying to tell you that it can't be a certain way. But what I wanted to do is I had a couple of live streams I want to try and find. Sorry for jumping around here, but I wanted to try and find I did a couple of live streams where I talked about sort of these different phases. So I'm just scrolling through my stuff here, so I apologize. Oh, so this one. Okay, so I'm going to put in three links here, okay? So this is one. This is two coming in. And then this is three. And these are, like I said, these are 3 phases. Sorry if you're on a platform, you can't see the stuff coming through the chat. Too bad. No, I'm just kidding. But you can check them out on YouTube if you go to my live videos. These ones are about the different, sort of the 3 different phases I talk about. So how you can apply to jobs, how you can interview, and then what to do once you've started your job. So hopefully that's helpful. Man, the chat sucks. It says LinkedIn user. I apologize. Let me see who said it on LinkedIn, though. I'm going to refresh because LinkedIn will tell me who said it. Glenn Watson. Awesome. Okay. So Glenn said one of the worst experiences I had with blame culture was when I was at Microsoft as an FTE. To be honest, the division wasn't doing well. Overhired, getting pressure from execs from the top. That was around 2013 to 2015. Yeah, it's interesting. I've heard oh, and Glenn's is on YouTube. Okay, that's funny. Between two different chats, but yeah, I think I wasn't at Microsoft that early, and I've heard that different points in time, it's been kind of challenging at Microsoft with kind of a crappier culture. So I feel like fortunately that's not how it is now, at least in my experience. Miguel on TikTok. Hi, I'm from Colombia. What do you think about learning .NET in 2024? I think it's an awesome technology to pick up. I think it's one of the best times to jump into .NET. There is a ton of stuff. There's still like a lot of people are like, oh, .NET, Microsoft, we can't trust Microsoft. We hate Microsoft. We don't want to run on Windows platforms. It runs on Linux. It's run on Linux for a long time. There's a lot of good performance benchmarks that show it's very fast. You can make web applications, desktop applications, mobile applications, embedded applications. You can use it for basically anything. It's pretty good all around. Is it going to be, faster than Rust in, every single use case? Like, no, it has a garbage collector. It's probably not going to be faster than Rust in most use cases. Can it be faster in some use cases? For sure. But I don't know, like depends what you want to do. If you want to go spend time building stuff in Rust, or if you want to be able to probably build and iterate on things faster in .NET, there's trade-offs to make. But I think, yeah, it's a great time to learn .NET. I'm obviously biased. I'm a .NET developer, not professionally anymore, but I'm a hobby .NET developer now that I don't code at work, but I think it's a great tech to use. So cool. Okay. I don't see any other questions right now. I'm going to jump back to the article, but folks, of course, please, if you're just joining, I'm happy to pause what I'm doing and answer questions for you. Okay. So jumping back into this whole list of everyone who had some amount of accountability, right? We were up to 4 different people: the developer that coded the change, the product owner, and then 2 more senior engineers that have signed off on things. Now, I said, it's not about tallying up who had the biggest role, right? Because you might go through that list and say, well, that individual developer had more steps along the way where they had responsibility. Therefore, it's their fault. We're not talking fault. We're talking about responsibility and accountability. Okay, so it's a list of roles. It's pretty big that we went through, but there's more. So let's keep going. So the senior engineers approved the pull request for the more junior individual developer. They didn't check or ask about flighting. So they played a role in that case, right? They're the more experienced ones on the team. If they're signing off on it and they don't have evidence of how these things are going to be carried out, they should be asking questions about this. As an example, neither did the individual developer nor the product owner did any follow-up with the feature once it was deployed. Now, I didn't mention it explicitly in my story that I wrote, but I omitted it, and we can assume it didn't happen. So, so again, that's a role that both of these individuals played by like either forgetting or not having enough awareness to go check that it's working. It was like, it's submitted, it's good to go, okay. So then I wrote, the individual developer didn't write any coded tests for their feature. Okay? The senior developers never even checked or asked about this. It's a missed opportunity. So all of them played a role. It's not just the individual developer that didn't write the tests and we go, oh, look, it's your fault you missed the tests. Like, why did the senior engineers approve it? Okay, so they have some responsibility in that. And then a little hint, it's probably more obvious if you were, reading my article on the site or an email, but I said, notice that the first time the word test is even shown up in the article. And it is. If you were to do a keyword search, it doesn't show up anywhere else until this point. So the team doesn't have any automatic gates in place for new code getting some degree of testing. Right? Because this guy or girl was able to go push this code through. People signed off on it, no tests. So why does a team have a culture of that? So I said the team in particular, the manager, has a role to play here. So now we've explicitly added in the manager for helping being able to shape and drive the culture of the team, right? And whoever else is on the team, because that's a team thing. If you're in a position where your team is not doing these types of things, it's something that the team is either not valuing or there hasn't been time made for it. Maybe people do value it, but clearly the value is not recognized if it hasn't been put in place. Other things are taking priority. So with that last line, the team doesn't have any automatic gates in place for new code getting some degree of testing. So now the team and the manager are also added in for responsibility here. So we just added on a pile of people. Okay, so it's clearly not just the one person who developed the thing, broke stuff. We don't just point at them and say your fault, because everyone along the way had some amount of accountability. So I wrote, now the scope of responsibility is getting wider and wider. So I said we could keep doing this, right? We could keep trying to call out where there's missed opportunities and who else from the team could have been chiming in and adding their perspective and stuff. But like, I just wanted to say, like, the way this was conducted is not creating a positive feedback loop. So having that blame situation where someone was brought onto a bridge, they were basically put on the spot, and then in the post-incident review, they were put on the spot. I think that this kind of thing, development grinds to a halt over time because of fear, right? People are not empowered, they are fearful. So I said a continued decline in morale and then a shrinking team. And it's a shrinking team because some people will realize that they don't want to put up with this. And they won't. And they will leave. They'll switch teams. They'll switch away from places that are toxic like this when they feel that they have an opportunity they can go do. And I realize some people listening or watching might say, well, not with this job market. And I hear you, but like, people will go looking. And if they try, they will go get jobs in other places, because people won't stick around for this kind of thing. Okay, so now is this topic of radical accountability. You can probably guess where this is going. Let me switch back so I can talk more with my hands, because that's what I like to do. But I had mentioned at the beginning of this presentation that, like, it's a presentation? This live stream? Presentation sounds too formal. I don't know. Let's not say that again. The beginning of this stream, it's a lot more casual that way. I had mentioned that I got the idea for radical accountability, at least the naming, from Radical Candor. If you have not read about Radical Candor, I think it's really cool. It's a great read, but it's this idea around, it's a good way to explain it. It's like you need to have a high degree of trust and respect with people, and then you can essentially be brutally honest with them because they know that you're trying to help. Okay, so if you imagine your best friend, right? When people say, like, you know, a real friend is going to tell you not what you want to hear, but what you need to hear. That's radical candor. So I liked how radical candor sounded, and I said, I want a phrase, and I'm going to copy radical candor. So I said radical accountability. So the way that I summarized radical accountability was, it's nobody's fault, but it's everybody's responsibility to improve it. So everyone should be accountable for making sure that going forward, things are in an improved state, regardless of whatever situation occurred. And if you take this mindset, okay, of instead of going, that's not really my problem, that was Joe, like Joe totally pushed that code up and Steve and Sally reviewed it, like, man, they're in trouble, like, sucks to be them. Like, instead of doing this thing where we blame and then we push responsibility onto others, if we all do the exact opposite and we find ways that we can help, and it's a mutual thing, because if only one person does this, you would say, well, it's not really fair to that one person because everyone else is going like, hey, you take the work, I don't want to do that. And this person's like, okay, I'll try my best to help. Yeah, that's a crappy situation too. But if everyone is trying to contribute, everyone's trying to be accountable and making things better because they want the entire team to get better, I think that's where I'm going with radical accountability. So I said, when the entire team can help own and drive improvements, everyone wins instead of that one person losing, right? So we have blame culture. One person's clearly losing, doesn't feel so great, but instead with radical accountability, the entire team is in a winning position. Everyone can feel safer. they'll know, knowing they'll be supported if they fail. So instead of this fear culture, right? So instead of being fearful that something bad's going to happen to you, you literally get the exact opposite, where you're like, I'm not afraid because I know that we're all doing everything we can to make sure this will succeed, and I know I will be supported. So, and then I said, everyone can help build confidence instead of one person being torn down. And Johnny on TikTok, thanks for stopping in. A team like that is a sinking ship. Absolutely. So growth mindset all the way. Yeah, growth mindset's a huge thing at Microsoft, and I hope a lot more places think this way, right? But the blame thing, yeah, I think it's a great way to put it. It's a sinking ship for sure, because once people realize, and like part of why I wanted to make this for folks that are joining a little later, I had someone on social media that had reached out and they were explaining a scenario where they were basically being blamed, and they were saying, "Is this normal?" So I wanted to be able to talk about this because that tells me there are people out there that think it is normal, and I don't think that's okay. Not saying like, hey, this person, they don't know anything. Like, I mean, it's not okay that there are places that are making people think that this is normal. It probably doesn't feel normal, right? It doesn't feel good. You would hope that's not a normal thing, but unfortunately it happens at a lot of places. I wanted to talk about this so that people that are going through it realize, like, no, like that's not a good way to set up a team. And if it feels really crappy, that's because it is. And it does not have to be that way. So, the way that I finished this off was essentially saying, I think really the only way that you have like only one person that's responsible is if you're literally like a one-person company. So if you are a solopreneur, right, and you are building software and you are you are the everything in that company because you're the only person, yeah, odds are it's probably all on you. I mean, it's also the whole team, but you are the whole team. So in general, I want to encourage people that, you know, if people speak up, you can have influence over things. So I know that can be kind of scary, but I think it's important. And, you know, if you are the kind of person, if you're watching this, listening to this, and you're going, like some of the things I was saying about, you know, blaming, if you're like, no, that's what works for us. Like, we want to make sure people understand the severity of things going wrong, the importance of doing things right. And that's why we make sure that we can make, I don't know, what's the right phrase for it? Like make a, not make a point, kind of like make a, we want to make an example of someone, right? Sorry, my words aren't working today. My words barely work most days, but if you want to make an example of someone and we find that works well, I just wanted to say that it actually doesn't work well, or at least not as well as it could work. So if you think it's working well, it's not sustainable. It's just not. People will not stick around for that kind of thing. It's just how it is. So if you are the kind of person doing this and it feels like, hey, when we make an example of people, we get the results we want, you very well might get those results temporarily, and it will completely erode your team. And it's just not going to get better. The culture needs to shift. So that was what I wanted to share with folks. I got through that pretty quick. Most times it's a little bit over an hour. But I will I'll stop there and kind of say, if you're in the chat and you have questions about anything, happy to answer. So usually at this point, what I'll do is a little bit of an advertisement, if you don't mind. SK, have you heard of Reviture? I have not, and I don't know if I should search that. Certainly not on the shared screen. Reviture. Company. Better way to build a skill-based technology. And then the top thing on Reddit is the company Reviture a scam or questionable? So I have no idea. I've never heard of Reviture, unfortunately. And then the top answer, sorry, I don't know anything about this company, just reading it. Top answer, it's a joke of a company, pretty much what others said. And thanks, Johnny. So Johnny's question or comments on TikTok aren't going to the shared chat just because of how the platform works. But so thanks for sharing. Love the idea of radical accountability. Love radical candor. Yes, awesome. Well, thanks, Johnny. No, I appreciate you being here. Thanks for tuning in. And yeah, radical candor for folks. Again, if you haven't read Radical Candor, it's a great read. They talk about some other quadrants of like how people try to help and how they lead and stuff. And there's like ruinous empathy is one where you have, say, like people that are trying to be helpful, but like they're too empathetic. So they're just like, oh no, it's okay. And like, they're not actually giving people like the difficult feedback they need to hear. Like that's one of the worst things you can do for people. It's not mean, right? It doesn't have to be like, oh, you're a piece of crap and you're like yelling at people. But ruinous empathy, which is part of this radical candor topic, ruinous empathy can be very dangerous because it's almost like easy to do. You just be like extremely nice to people and never really give them what they need to hear. And then they never really improve from it. So it's kind of interesting. Oh, interesting. So SK saying they basically train people with no experience in tech and they then contract them out to companies like Infosys. Yeah. Yeah, I haven't heard of them. Sorry. Reviture is a brand new thing for me. Johnny, do you stream on Twitch too? Yep. So I stream on every platform. It's funny. TikTok doesn't get a lot of traction. So super cool that you stopped in from TikTok, but Twitch, YouTube, Kick, most people right now are on Twitter watching this. YouTube is next. LinkedIn used to be, when I first started streaming, LinkedIn was, I basically had all of my views coming from LinkedIn, like an order of magnitude more people coming from LinkedIn. And I think that like LinkedIn is really dumb in how they do a lot of their impressions. So I'm going to rant about this for just a moment because it's frustrating, but LinkedIn, social media platforms, when you put links to places, they will penalize the number of impressions. Okay. And they do that because they want to keep people on the platform, not going away. Totally makes sense. So you got to be kind of tricky with how you're doing stuff on LinkedIn for putting links and stuff in places. But you would think if one were to host a LinkedIn event that would literally bring users to stick on the platform, you would think that they would promote that more, right? Like, hey, look, I'm trying to get people onto LinkedIn. You should come here to LinkedIn. You would think that they would give it higher impressions, but they don't. When I post a LinkedIn live, it's arguably the worst performing type of post I can ever have. It's insane. Oh, and then Glenn was saying I was on LinkedIn, but the video was jittering a lot compared to YouTube. That's weird. I wonder if this platform's experiencing an issue with LinkedIn. So for folks that are, if you're watching this, just to explain how this setup works, is I stream out of one source. TikTok is the only exception. But I stream off of my computer. It goes to restream.io, and then they send that out to all the platforms. So very interesting that I wonder if it's not even a restream. It might just be LinkedIn that's having a problem. So sorry about that, but thanks for letting me know. One thing I found as an Aussie working in the US is we are blatant with feedback. How have you found working with different cultures with feedback? That's a great question, Glenn. I think in my personal experience, I haven't had too many like very big discrepancies. And I think there's been sometimes almost maybe like almost from I'm sure part of its culture, but sometimes just language. So when English is not a first language and then people are communicating thoughts, I think sometimes it comes out, it can be more critical or sound more harsh because there's less extra words to like soften things up. So in my experience, when that's happened, it's felt more like a language thing versus a cultural thing. Now, it could literally, as I said, it could be both. It could very well be both. And they were like, I know that I could go soften this with other words, but I'm choosing not to. But I feel like I'm speculating, but it's felt more like language to me than different cultures. Now, with that said, I have heard, I have observed other people from different cultures, like not the same background as me, and I've observed people from different cultures that are exchanging feedback, and I've been uncomfortable watching it happen. And I've talked about this before, but like for me, like I get secondhand embarrassment very easy. And I'm not talking about people being embarrassed in this situation, but I kind of like when I observe someone else having a strong emotion to something, like I go like, oh, I'm feeling that too. And it's like embarrassment's really bad because for that reason, I don't want to feel super embarrassed when I'm watching something happen, because who wants to feel embarrassed? But a similar thing happens if I'm watching an exchange of words or people are interacting and I'm going, oh, like this person is not receiving that well. Like I kind of go like, like I feel that. And then the flip side is that like the person giving or like communicating at the other person, I'm like, I want to help. I want to help. I can see what's happening here. I want to make it better. So yeah, Glenn, I have seen, again, not for myself so much as observing others of different cultural backgrounds, and that being kind of tricky. Now, because in these situations it's something I've observed, I've been able to step in, especially as a manager, and kind of coach around that. And it's on both sides too. So on receiving it, because I always say like, and I feel like this is a fact, but like communication is at least two ways, right? If you have two people communicating, communication there's some responsibility on both ends of the communication. One, especially for the person trying to communicate ideas or thoughts, most of the responsibility is on this person, right? But I would say if the person receiving the communication, right, you're hearing something from someone else, they're giving you information, I think there is still some responsibility on you. And TikTok is doing this thing where it says I'm not active every time. I am here. Hear me roar. Um, I think there's this responsibility or an opportunity for some accountability on the receiving end of communication. So what I mean by this is let's start with the receiving side. If I've talked to someone and they've expressed that they've had like a bad interaction or bad feedback or something like that, especially if I've observed the interaction or I'm very familiar with the individual and who's giving the feedback or on the other end of the interaction, there's an opportunity where I can coach this person and say, hey, like, I'm not trying to defend the other person, but we can only, like, you can only control yourself. You can't control other people. So when this is happening, like, you know that this other person is like, they're not trying to attack you, right? Like, you know that they want good things for you, right? And they're like, yes, like, I believe that. So I said, okay, if we go into this giving this person the benefit of the doubt and we start hearing things in a way that makes it seem otherwise, I would say it's a good opportunity to pause and, like, again, doesn't give them free reign to say mean stuff to you, but like, is there an opportunity to pause and say, is there a different way to interpret this? Or am I jumping straight to this person's mean? So some coaching around that can look very different in different situations. And then especially on the giving side, when it comes to, feedback, criticism, different interactions, a really big opportunity there to say, hey, like, by the way, like when this person was receiving what you said, like, did you notice? And I might call out some examples. And I've absolutely had people go, yeah, like it was really weird. Like I told person X this thing and I could sense right away they were like not okay with it. And I didn't understand why. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like, first of all, at least this individual has some awareness that when they're communicating something, they can sense or see, or they have some feedback that's like, like this person's reacting in a way that I don't expect. So I think that's a really good thing. But what's challenging beyond that is trying to understand why. So, hey, I said something to someone. I could be like, I asked them a question, because I've seen this come up too. I asked someone a question about what was going on with something, and I could immediately see that they didn't like that. So, okay, interesting. Why didn't they like it? And then I didn't know why, so we just kept talking through it, but it felt like the rest of the conversation was really crappy after that point. Okay, so maybe it's something to do with how you ask the question. And again, it might not be something that you would ever think of because it's just not part of how you communicate, right? You have to think this other person might be interpreting things a different way. And some of it's like not Certainly not the easiest. I think it's the most simple advice, doesn't make it the most easy. But I think some of the most simple advice in that situation is like, hey, look, like you had the awareness to know that someone seemed to feel off about something, right? Okay. So really simple, not easy, but really simple is literally just to ask them about it. Is to have a conversation about it, acknowledge and say, hey, like, sorry, by the way, I realize I feel like I might have upset you or might have caused some confusion, or respond to whatever emotion you seem to be observing from them. And just take the opportunity to try and clear the air with them. You're not trying to escalate things. So you're not trying to say like, hey man, like I didn't tell you something mean, or like I didn't try to hurt your feelings. Like it's not not about that. You're trying to say like you're just trying to improve the status of things. So trying to understand why people feel a certain way, and then understand what you can do to try and work around that. And again, I've seen this happen, especially with different language barriers, where people say they're using English as the common language, and two people don't have that as their first language. That mixed with different cultural backgrounds can lead to some of this confusion. So Glenn saying, yeah, I definitely had to learn about the other party and use a lot more filler words with feedback. I appreciate that this has taken as long, but this might not be the right approach. Yeah. And honestly, like, especially more recently on LinkedIn, we were talking about code reviews. So on Twitter and LinkedIn and Threads, I had some good responses about code reviews and giving feedback. And I had some people, legitimately, some people were saying like, no, there's no place for like softening things. And there's no place for softening things because it's not personal. And I think the problem that I have with this is that, like, first of all, I do agree. I agree it's not supposed to be personal. But the problem is that you can't command that expectation of people. It's not supposed to be personal. Yes, we all know that. The problem is you cannot command that expectation. So you can't just snap your fingers and say, therefore, no one will take it personally, because guess what? They will and they do. So given that you know they will and they do, you can continue to try and coach people around not taking it personally. But until you've established the rapport with people to build up that trust and respect, I can basically assure you there are going to be people that read your feedback and they're going, man, this person's being a jerk. And now are these individuals telling me like, well, now it's this other person's fault for interpreting it that way? Yeah, kind of, but like you can also just not do that. Like two people can own some of the responsibility here. So anyway, I thought that was kind of fascinating, but I do think it's important to try as much as possible when you're communicating, like if you're on the giving side or the receiving side, trying to take some accountability. And you can literally just work on improving communication by working together instead of being automatically defensive, instead of like saying it's got to be this other person's fault. You know, back to the blame thing. Instead of blaming other people, what can we do instead? So thanks, Glenn, for sharing that. I thought it was a good question, so thanks for asking as well. So, oh, and sorry, SK, I saw the rest of your question. Just wondering if I should just start that now, and then if I find a better opportunity, jump ship. The pay will be low. Yeah, I can't. Unfortunately I can't advise. I feel like that's outside of my, I don't know, my my responsibility, my abilities. I don't feel comfortable advising on that. What I can do is sort of offer some general guidance, and I would say like, look, if you've been looking for a while and you need money and you're comfortable and you understand that you want to continue to progressing, right? And you're like, hey, like I could go do this for now and I'm still going to invest time into trying to interview and trying to level up in different ways. And I see this as a stepping stone. That could be cool. If you think that maybe a lot of the stuff you're reading is perhaps untrue, like I can't make that decision for you, right? So if you're like, hey, like I want to see for myself and I feel comfortable at least that I could go do this, like I think these are all questions you have to ask yourself, right? And unfortunately, I cannot do that for you. But it sounds like it's an option at the very minimum, right? So something that you could consider. Okay, I'll still take more questions until then. Just jumping over to stuff. By the way, I do flashbang warning. Sorry, I do have a podcast. If you guys want to check that out, it's on Spotify, Apple Music, all the podcast places. So you can watch these on YouTube as well. So basically, I sit down with people. If I scroll through, there's other software engineers that I sit down with and chat with, and just kind of get their career experiences. This one here was with Ethan Evans, who is a VP at Amazon. I got to talk with Scott Hanselman. If you're familiar with Scott, especially if you're in the .NET world, he's probably the big celebrity that I've had on the podcast, which was super cool. So I really enjoyed that. I have another YouTube channel. It's called Code Commute. If you want to check this out, I basically drive to and from work. And when I'm stuck in traffic, I talk to you guys. So it's recorded, it's not live, but that's an opportunity. And then the final plug I have is that I do have a bunch of courses on Dome Train if you are interested in checking it out. Interesting. Thanks, Justin Bentley, for the heads up on, it seems like a browser issue, kind of interesting. But I do have a bunch of courses available on Dome Train if you want to check these out. Just for a little bit of extra context, Dome Train has historically, it's by Nick Chaps's, it's historically been C# and .NET content because that's a lot of the programming material I put out. So I have a bunch of C# courses, but Ryan Murphy and I are starting the section on Dome Train that's about career development. So we have our first course, which is Nailing the Behavioral Interview. So that has launched. We have another one launching in a couple of weeks that will be career-based. And then we got a lot more queued up to do after that, and they will all be in the career category. So if you enjoy how I try to teach things, Ryan's also a great creator. He's got a huge LinkedIn following, and he's an engineering manager at Yelp. Ryan's great. So if you like this style, maybe you will find that one of these courses is beneficial. But I do always say, and I mean it honestly, I try to put out as much free content as I physically can, because I want to be able to do that. I want to be able to help, and I feel good if it's helping people. But I do recognize that some people, they find that if they are paying for something, then they are more accountable to it. So courses can be a great option for people, but my goal is never to try and like trick you into buying things. So like I said, I'm going to keep pumping out free content, and I will keep doing that. But if there's courses that make sense for you, then, it would be great if you find them valuable. And I would love that opportunity to be able to help you out. So I don't see any other questions that have rolled in, so I will probably call it there, folks. Again, sorry for folks on LinkedIn that were having some browser issues. It's kind of crappy, but hopefully everyone else on the other platforms, things were pretty smooth. And yeah, I appreciate the time. Tomorrow morning, so 7 a.m. PST, I will be doing live coding. It's going to be a continuation of the last live stream, which is going to be trying to get my WordPress blog moved over to Blazor. The author of the Blazor blog project I'm going to be using, I think his last name is Geisel, so Stephen Geisel. I'm so sorry if I'm saying that wrong. He's actually going to be in the chat and stuff, so he joined last time and was able to offer insights and things like that. So should be pretty cool if you want to see some live coding. I'm going to be focused on trying to find the right patterns to move posts over. So it's not going to be like a watch me do it start to finish, it's going to work perfectly, because I know it's not. I have to figure out how to migrate the format of the post properly. So they're going to be HTML based with all these plugins and stuff, and then they have to go to Markdown. And I don't want to lose all of the features and functionality I had in my post. So should be interesting, but that's going to be 7 a.m. PST tomorrow morning. So thank you so much for checking this out. I hope you tune in. Actually, I'm not going to be here next week because I'm going to be in Hawaii. So don't tune in next week. Don't do that. Tune in the week after that. Or maybe not. I might not even be back. Don't ever tune in again. it's all over. No, I'll try to I'll try to post a schedule for folks, but please be great to see you join next time that I do